Is Islam Makhachev ducking Ilia Topuria? Alex Periera is accused of doing something interesting. Bryce Mitchell is going off the rails. Nothing new there. Conor McGregor meets with Trump and a bunch of other stuff in the MMA news today. And I want you guys to do me a favor and drop a like and a comment on the video if you guys enjoy these news kind of videos. I do enjoy covering UFC news and the stuff going on in the MMA space that not a lot of other people talk about, because some of this stuff is really small, but it's still fun to talk about. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Is Islam Makhachev ducking Ilia Topuria? Now, originally, whenever I saw this report from Happy Punch, I was like, okay, Islam wants Ilia Topuria to fight a contender before he gets a title shot, so he doesn't have to say he beat another featherweight. And while I do, to some degree, agree with this, on another hand, it's like Islam preaches anyone, anywhere, anytime, and with no clear-cut contender at lightweight, I would love to see Islam fight Ilia Topuria. I think it's the fight to make. Justin Gaethje's right. He's won 3 of his last 4. He said he's only lost the exhibition match to Max Holloway, which is hilarious. Justin Gaethje got one of the worst and brutal beatdowns I've ever seen from Max Holloway, and then got brutally KO'd. Then he comes back 11 months later to face Rafael Fiziev, who he has a win over, arguably loses the fight against a short notice Rafael Fiziev. Justin Gaethje's also already had 2 title shots, whereas Ilia Topuria has never fought for the title at lightweight. I'm sorry, but Justin Gaethje, under any circumstances, does not deserve the title shot versus Islam. And if Islam chooses to fight Gaethje over Topuria, I think that's a very bad look for him. You also have Arman Tsarukyan, right? Issue with Arman is he pulled out the day before his fight with Islam. The UFC is not going to want to give him a title shot. Arman's been calling out guys like Michael Chandler if he beats Patty. He's been calling out other guys to say, hey, if you want a title shot, then you have to get through me. Who else we got? We got Charles Oliveira, right? On a 1-fight win streak. Already has a loss to Makhachev on a 1-fight win streak. And he beat Michael Chandler. I'm sorry, but a win over Michael Chandler is not all that impressive. Sure, the matchup between Makhachev and Charles is always an interesting one. But in my opinion, with the current state of the lightweight division, it's never made more sense than to give Ilia Topuria a title shot. Yes, a lot of guys are going to claim that he should earn his status for a title shot. But listen, man, this guy is undefeated in the UFC. He knocked out Volkan Max back-to-back. He vacated his belt, and now he wants to go up and challenge for Islam's belt. I think put the fight together. And like I said, if you're going to be Islam going around saying, brother, anyone, anywhere, anytime, and then whenever the anyone comes up and it happens to be Ilia Topuria, you're like, well, he has to fight a contender. I don't agree with it, and I think Islam should just sign the fight. I don't think anybody's going to be saying that Islam just beat a featherweight if he beats Topuria. Topuria has performed at lightweight before against Jai Herbert, and he knocked him out cold. So Topuria has shown he can fight in the lightweight division. He is 5'7", but he's a bigger guy. He's stocky. So, yeah, I think this is 100% the fight to make. And I do think the UFC ultimately will force Islam's hand in fighting Ilia Topuria. I don't see them putting together Gaethje Makhachev or Arman Makhachev or Charles Makhachev. I think Makhachev is going to fight Topuria. There's just going to be some interesting negotiations behind the scene. And there is a report that the story that came out about Makhachev saying he turned down Ilia Topuria is fake. I'm not sure who's right and who's wrong, or like what's the true story, but the consensus is that Makhachev wants Topuria to get a win at lightweight before he goes ahead and gives him a title shot, and I disagree. Let's do Makhachev Topuria. Everybody wants to see it. This is every fan's dream matchup right now. 2 of the most skilled fighters in the entire UFC. You have the young new generation of Ilia Topuria with the best boxing in the UFC, a great ground game as well to go with it, a Greco-Roman national champion in the country of Georgia, I believe, and then you have, or Spain, and then you have Islam Makhachev, the reigning pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, most lightweight title defenses, unstoppable, one of the most well-rounded fighters in UFC history. This is the fight to make, man. And if Islam can beat Topuria to get to his 16-fight win streak, you want to talk about legendary GOAT stuff. Because Islam, I'll be honest, man, his UFC run is great, and I've even have him high on my GOAT list. But the issue with Islam is that he did have a little bit of weak competition coming up to the belt, and that's not 100% his fault. Sure, he has great wins over Volk and against Oliveira and against Poirier, but leading up to the belt, man, it was the Bobby Greens and the Drew Dobers, you know, and the Thiago Moiseses. He didn't have the greatest of wins. So I think putting another legend or another champion and pound-for-pound fighter in Ilia Topuria, this would be the 3rd time Islam beat a fighter in the pound-for-pound top 3 if he were to defeat Topuria. Charles Oliveira was ranked pound-for-pound #3 when Islam beat him. Volkanovski was ranked pound-for-pound #1 whenever Islam beat him. And Topuria is now ranked pound-for-pound #3. So a win over Topuria, in my opinion, would do wonders for Islam's legacy. And then can you imagine if he got a win over Topuria, right? And then JDM happened to get a win over Bilal and get the belt. And then Islam went up to welterweight to get that belt. I mean, we're talking about legendary GOAT stuff. So, yes, I wouldn't say Islam is ducking, but it is a bad look to say anyone, anywhere, anytime. And then, like I said, the anyone comes up and he's like, meh, fight a contender. It's like, bro, it's the fight to make right now. Everybody wants to see it. So I hope the UFC puts it together. I'm excited. Do you guys think Islam is ducking, or is he being fair by saying that Ilia should fight a contender? Let me know in the comments. Moving on to the next story. We got Magomed Ankalaev's coach believed that Alex Pereira was greasing. These greasing allegation stuff always makes me laugh. Cheeto Vera said the same thing about Sean O'Malley whenever he fought him. Then you had BJ Penn accusing GSP of greasing, I believe. Now you got Magomed Ankalaev's coach accusing Alex Pereira of greasing. It's very silly. I don't think UFC fighters are actually greasing. I think they all get Vaseline applied to them to some degree for cuts and whatnot, but I do not think under any circumstance Alex Pereira was greasing. And even if he did, it didn't help him at all in the fight. I mean, did it seem like Magomed was trying to grab Alex and was slipping off of him anytime he went for a takedown? I didn't see that personally. So the whole greasing thing is kind of funny. And I mean, Magomed Ankalaev won the fight. So what does this coach have? Like, what is his coach trying to prove by saying Alex Pereira was greasing? It's a bad look. It's unnecessary to point out, but it is funny. Magomed Ankalaev beat Alex Pereira, and I could understand if he lost, you know, then you could throw a little bit of cope in there and say, hey man, we lost, but the reason we lost is because Alex Pereira was greasing. Nonetheless, I do want to see the rematch, and I think Magomed Ankalaev has already confirmed that they're already in talks for a rematch. And let's be real, guys, it's going to be in October. It's going to be in Abu Dhabi. Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira. And listen, man, I'm worried for Alex Pereira. I do want him to win the rematch, and I am picking him to win the rematch. But however, he's going to be older at 38, right? He's going to have taken more damage. He's going to be slower. Magomed Ankalaev is going to have that confidence now that he cannot strike him on the feet. So it's a tough matchup for Alex Pereira in the rematch, but I'm excited to see it. And I do not think Alex Pereira was greasing at UFC 313, but I could be wrong. I wasn't in there. Who knows? But either way, I thought this was a funny little story. Moving on to the next thing, we got Tom versus Jones. This is the fight everyone wants to see, and Demetrius Johnson has went ahead and threw his name in the hat and said that the UFC needs to pay John Jones. And you know what? As much as I don't like John Jones, he's right. The UFC made $1.4 billion in profits in 2024, and they can't spare $30 million for John Jones. Turkey Al Sheik, where you at, bro? Pay John Jones this money. We need to see this Aspinall fight. I'm tired of the heavyweight division being stalled. Listen, John Jones, I dislike him. I think he's a piece of crap. You guys know that. But he has a long MMA career, and he's been on top for a long time. Pay him the $30 million. Let's get the John Jones Tom Aspinall fight going. If not, let John Jones ride off into the sunset and let Aspinall fight for Jelton Almeida or Cyril Gane for the title. I'd love to see that as well, but let's stop holding up the heavyweight division, man. I'm ready for it to move on. I'm ready to see Tom fight. And you guys already know that the reason that Tom's not fighting is because if he defends that interim belt, that makes John Jones look worse. And the UFC are not going to allow John Jones to look worse by Tom Aspinall defending that interim belt. So I think that's why Tom Aspinall has been on ice, kind of negotiating and waiting for the Jones fight. People are talking about, man, Aspinall should stop sitting out. He should fight Jones. And I agree. Or he should fight contenders. And I agree, but the UFC is not going to allow that. They're going to say, hey, man, we like you. You're a great kid, but you're not going to be defending that interim title. We cannot make John Jones look worse, because the more he defends that interim belt, the worse John Jones looks. And the UFC, you know, Dana White loves his golden goose, John Jones. So, yes, I agree with Demetrius Johnson. Give John Jones his $30 million payday. Tom Aspinall will probably be good with like $2 million. He probably wouldn't even. Tom Aspinall will probably fight John Jones for $500,000. He just wants to fight. Tom Aspinall's in it for the legacy. He's not in it. I don't think he cares about John Jones, if I'm being honest. A lot of people claim that like Tom Aspinall cares so much about John Jones. If you go back and watch Aspinall historically on what he says, he cares about the belt. He wants the belt. He said multiple times that he doesn't care if it's John Jones or if it's Jelton Almeida or if it's Cyril Gane. He just wants to be the undisputed champion. And I feel him, man. You fight your whole life to get to the UFC stage, right? You make it to the top. You become interim champion, and the heavyweight champion doesn't want to fight you. It's like, it's annoying. The fans want to see this fight. This is potentially the biggest fight in UFC heavyweight history. And if they put this on International Fight Week, pay Jones's bag and put the fight together, man, this would probably sell over 1 million pay-per-views, especially with a stacked undercard. I can see this selling over 1 million. I'm excited. I hope the fight happens. I'm not going to lie. I don't have high hopes. I'm under the impression now that the fight most likely won't happen, despite Dana White gaslighting us fans and saying it's 100% going to happen. Never trust what Dana White says. Over the years, he's proven time and time again that he's not here to tell the truth. He's here to be a hype man and not a promoter. So, yeah, Dana White claiming the fight's going to happen. Tom Aspinall said the UFC's telling him the fight's going to happen. Pay John Jones the money. Let's get the fight together on International Fight Week. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. Should the UFC give John Jones a bag and throw him the $30 million in his face? I think they should. Next up on the news, we got Nate Diaz wants to come back and become a UFC champion, which I think is hilarious. Guys, if you don't know, Nate Diaz is the journeyman of all journeymen, and he's nearly 40 years old. This guy's still acting like he's 16, throwing water bottles and backing up in the streets towards people. It's absolutely embarrassing. But listen, at the end of the day, Nate Diaz is exciting. He also roasted the UFC for their current lack of star power, and I do agree. The UFC does not really have any stars right now. There's Alex Periera, and there's John Jones, who isn't fighting. Outside of that, man, you have Topuria and Makhachev. To some degree, they're stars, but they're not like a McGregor or Jones or, Israel Adesanya level of stars, Alex Pereira level of stars. They just don't gather that amount of attention. And I thought it was hilarious that Nate Diaz is talking about coming back and competing for a UFC title because he couldn't get a title in his prime. You really think that Nate Diaz at 40 years old is going to come back to the UFC and beat the welterweight champion or the lightweight champion? Islam Makhachev destroys Nate Diaz and finishes him. And Bilal Muhammad will just out-grapple him and outwork him to a dominant decision. So, yeah, Nate Diaz just doing anything to keep his head in the name in the headlines. We know this guy loves attention. He loves to be the center of everything in the MMA world. If Nate Diaz's name's not being talked about, he starts to get a little soy. He starts to, get a little upset because he's not being talked about. And Nate Diaz has a massive ego. Most of these fighters do. But there's not a chance on this earth that Nate Diaz is going to ever win a UFC belt in his prime or now. He's just not good enough. He doesn't possess the skills. He's just, I don't know, man. He's a journeyman. If you land one good shot on Nate Diaz's eyebrow, he's going to get cut open. And with damage-based scoring, he's not going to win any fight because he has so much scar tissue above his eyebrows that he's going to get a bad cut, that he's going to get the fight stop, or he's just going to get dominated. He's too slow. His physique's too soy. He's not strong. He's just not good, man. I like Nate Diaz. I like the Diaz bros. They're fun, but they've never really been the best fighters. Let's be real. Nick Diaz was better than Nate Diaz overall, I'd say, skill for skill in his prime. But Nate Diaz, he's always been kind of a journeyman. Sure, he has a win over Conor McGregor, but it's like Conor McGregor has one win in the last 8 years. So are we really putting stock into that? It was prime McGregor. But either way, I thought this was funny. Nate Diaz coming back and saying he wants to win a UFC title. Let me know what you guys think about that. Are we going to see Nate Diaz go on a double champ run? He's going to come back, beat Islam, get the media title shot. He's going to beat Islam. Then they'll throw him to Bilal Muhammad, and Nate Diaz is going to become the 10th double champion in UFC history. And then he's going to ride out the UFC octagon with a blunt in his mouth and a lowrider. No, I'm joking. But yeah, I had to talk about this. Nate Diaz as a champion in 2025 is the funniest thing I've heard in a while. Yeah, that's what we got for Nate Diaz. Bryce Mitchell. I'm concerned for Bryce Mitchell, guys. Listen, I know you guys didn't like my last time I talked about Bryce Mitchell, how I said John Silva roasted him at the press conference, whatever. I can agree that John Silva was trying a bit hard, but some of the stuff that Bryce Mitchell was saying leading up to the John Silva fight, it's a bit concerning. He's saying that he can't sleep since John Silva has cast a spell on him at the UFC 314 press conference, and now he's seeing dreams where demons turn into beautiful women. Says that he is fighting a man possessed by a legion of demons at UFC 314. Now, this is right in the ballpark for Bryce Mitchell. He says stuff like this all the time, and I guess we're just normalized to him saying insane stuff. And I know a lot of his followers are just going to say he's a Christian man. He's just following the word of God. But even if you're a Christian or follow Christianity, some of the stuff he's saying or coming out of his mouth is absolutely nuts, man. This is not normal behavior, Bryce Mitchell thinks the earth is flat. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd agreed with BJ Penn that his mother was replaced by AI and living in his house. Bryce Mitchell, I don't know what this guy is up to these days. I don't know what kind of LSD he's on or what he's smoking, but man, some of the stuff he says is just, and he looked very upset at the press conference. And listen, all the antics aside, the demons and John Silva talking about flat earths, I don't care about any of that. I just want to see this fight. I do think people are underrating Bryce Mitchell's chance in this fight because Bryce Mitchell is a good fighter. Even if he shouts out Hitler, says he'd go fishing with him and denies the Holocaust, he is a great fighter. He has very good ground game and he's solid on the feet, but I am picking John Silva to TKO him. I think John Silva is just the next generation. I don't think Bryce Mitchell's head's in the game. He seems to have a lot on his mind these days, and I don't think fighting is his priority. Bryce Mitchell's worried about all this crap he's saying on his podcast. He's saying all this stuff at the press conference with John Silva about demons, or not on the press conference, but now I don't know. I don't feel like Bryce Mitchell's focused. He's talking about how he can't sleep, and it's concerning, guys. What do you think about Bryce Mitchell? Do you think he's going to come into the fight locked in against John Silva, ready to take him down to the ground and finish him? Or is John Silva going to piece up Bryce Mitchell? Either way, this is an intriguing matchup. I'm excited to see it. And yeah, man, may the best man win. But I do think John Silva is going to get it done. And I think he's going to start barking at Bryce Mitchell in the octagon. Bryce Mitchell, I believe, also said that as soon as he said a prayer like to cast the demons out of John Silva started barking. So that's another thing he said. So yes, Bryce Mitchell is making some interesting claims regarding demons and beautiful women in his dreams. But like I said, all antics aside, I am excited for the matchup. It is a fun fight, and I do think John Silva is going to get it done by second round TKO. But let me know what you guys think about Bryce Mitchell saying he can't sleep because John Silva cast a spell on him. The UFC is not happy with ESPN. If you guys don't know, the UFC and ESPN's deal, I believe, is ending this year. If I'm not mistaken, midway through the year. I'm not exactly sure on a date, but according to sources, the UFC is very unhappy, and Dana White and the UFC are very unhappy with the streams crashing over ESPN Plus. Whenever we're trying to watch the pay-per-views, it happened last pay-per-view. We were trying to watch the Gaethje and Fiziev fight, and the stream kept crashing. It happened to me a bunch of times. My stream froze. I had to refresh 6 times. It happened like 4 times during the fight. I missed a good like minute and a half of the Gaethje Fiziev fight because of that. And it was upsetting, man. I was excited for that fight, and I had to go back and rewatch it. It is what it is, but according to ESPN, they're also unhappy with the UFC's pay-per-view sales, and I can definitely understand where ESPN's coming from. The UFC has not been putting on the best cards. If you look at 2024 and 2025, the UFC has been very hit or miss. You'll have a card like 312, right? And then you'll have a card like 314. It's night and day on how good the cards is. Like 312 was like maybe like a 2 out of 10 in terms of star power and like fun fights. And 314 is probably like an 8 out of 10. It's just night and day. And obviously UFC 312 is only going to sell probably 200,000 buys, 150,000 buys. Whereas I can see 314 selling like 500, 600K. And if you guys don't know, the way the model's set up, it's so that ESPN automatically pays the UFC like 500,000 worth of pay-per-view buys. That's the deal. So if the UFC doesn't match that 500,000 buys and pay, then the ESPN's technically losing money. So I do not think that the UFC is going to re-sign with ESPN. I can 100% see them going with a different broadcast. There's rumors that it's going to be Netflix, and would that mean that the UFC is going away from the pay-per-view model? I'd be very interested to know that, because if being a UFC fan in 2025 is expensive, the UFC pay-per-views are like $80 to $85, and the UFC wonders why a lot of people pirate these events or illegally stream these events, because I'm sorry, man, but people aren't going to pay for UFC 312 an $80 card whenever the fight card has 2 ranked fights on the entire card and a bunch of nobodies. It's just not worth your money. It's just not. Even as a diehard fan as myself, I don't want to spend that kind of money. So you get what I'm saying? I do hope the UFC signs with another platform, because I do feel like this would force the UFC to want to put on better fights so they can kind of prove themselves. You know, whenever the UFC gets on a new program like Fox or ESPN, it seems like they have like a point to prove, like, oh, we're on Netflix now and we're going to put on some banger fights. And I hope that's what we see, you know. Either way, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that the UFC is on their way to move on to ESPN? I would love to hear your take on that. And last but not least, Conor McGregor meets with Trump on St. Patrick's Day to discuss Irish immigration. Conor McGregor expresses concerns over Ireland not being Ireland anymore, becoming less and less Irish by the day. And I thought it was very interesting that Trump met with Conor McGregor, of all people, the guy on the most booger sugar in the UFC. But it's not that surprising. Just looking by the picture, this guy's coked out of his mind. I don't care if he's in a suit and tie. He looks like he's on the booger sugar as we speak. And apparently the Irish prime minister condemned what Conor McGregor said or talked about with Trump. So that was funny. So yeah, if you guys want and envision to see that Conor McGregor's never fighting again, just look at his recent press conferences at BKFC. He's meeting with President Trump. This guy is not looking for fights anymore. He's looking to keep his name in the headlines by being controversial, or just Conor McGregor has an ego, right? And this guy, I believe, is a narcissist. He wants everybody to talk about him or bring his name up any chance he gets. So he's going to do the biggest thing to get the most people to talk about him, despite not having a fight since 2021. Recently, there was a tweet that was going around saying that Conor McGregor tweeted at Joe Rogan that he wants to go on the podcast. I do not think Joe Rogan's going to bring Conor McGregor on the podcast. He knows how controversial that would be. But what do you guys think about Conor McGregor meeting Trump at the Oval Office? I thought it was interesting nonetheless. I didn't watch the video or what they talked about, but I saw the headline and I had to talk about it. So yeah, I've made the prediction, the bold claim. I do not think Conor McGregor will ever step in the UFC octagon again. He might fight for BKFC. Conor McGregor as a UFC fighter will never fight again. I stand by that. This guy's almost 37 years old. He's coked out of his mind in every single interview we see him in. And yeah, man, I just don't see a world where this guy signs a UFC fight and actually makes it to the fight. And yeah, we're creeping up on 4 years since the last time that Conor McGregor fought. And ever since that leg break, he just hasn't been the same guy. So that's ultimately all the news for today, guys. Drop a like on the video if you guys like this news style videos and you want me to cover it more. I appreciate you guys. I'm out. Unk is gone. Peace.